Hey guys, welcome to another episode of your history teacher awkwardly talking to a phone in his child's playroom, also aka known as distance learning for Mr. Campagna's 8th grade history class. Today we are going to continue on with our uh, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe PowerPoint. So I'll give you an opportunity to pause right here and get out your PowerPoint and your fill in the blank notes. And we are going to end up covering about 5 slides today. All right, and so I'll give you an opportunity to go ahead and get those things out. All right, so we should be open to slide 5 on our PowerPoint presentation. All right, and really, slide 5, you should see a guy sitting here in a chair, kind of staring out. And the big headline is Marbury versus Madison. So we see our two names here, Marbury and Madison. And really, anytime we see two names, Marbury versus blank or so on and so forth, it's usually a court case, and that's what this is. Marbury versus Madison is one of the most influential court cases. It has a wide-ranging impact still felt today. The reality of Marbury versus Madison, as we'll see today, is that it's going to make the Supreme Court an equal partner to the other branches within the government. It's going to give the Supreme Court solidify the Supreme Court's power of judicial review. And as we'll see later on, judicial review is literally the right of the Supreme Court to review any law or decision made by the federal governments as well as the state governments. It is the highest court in the land. And so, really, Marbury versus Madison is going to solidify that power, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. So, let's go ahead and hit on to slide number 2 here. So, click it, and slide number 2 should bring up a little picture here of John Adams. Now, remember, John Adams has just lost in the election of 1800 to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson has now carried more electoral votes. He has been voted President of the United States. But there is a period of time in between when Jefferson is voted in to when he actually takes office. It's actually a matter of about 4 or 5 months. In that meantime, John Adams knows he's lost the election, but he still has this span of time. And in that time, John Adams is hurriedly trying to pass laws and other decisions to try to help his political party, the Federalists, and his political ideas. Right before he leaves office, Adams kind of comes up with this scheme. Him and actually Alexander Hamilton come up with this scheme, really. Adams passed the Midnight Judges Act during the waning hours of his presidency to maintain control in some form, even though he's losing. So, what is the Midnight Judges Act? Go ahead and click on it. Oh, I'm sorry, in that last box, guys, you should have filled in Midnight Judges Act. All right. But basically, as we see in the next box, Adams was trying to get as many Federalist judges onto the Supreme Court as he possibly could. He wants to essentially get as many of these guys into office before Jefferson takes over. You may ask yourself, well, why? Why does he care so much? Got to remember, how long does the Supreme Court justice serve for? They serve for life. And so in John Adams' mind, this was his legacy. If he could pack the court with as many judges that identified with him and his views or his party's view, he could influence politics for the next 10, 15, 20 years without even being in office. And that's his mindset. John Adams is really disappointed at how poorly his presidency comes out. He was a politician before. He was an experienced guy. And honestly, he kind of got embarrassed. And I feel in many ways he's trying to make up for that embarrassment now to try to create some sort of legacy. So anyway, if we click on the next box here, as you can see, he really, at the last minute of what he's trying to accomplish here, is trying to appoint all these judges right before the election flips over. So he sends Secretary of State John Marshall out with all these letters basically naming these people as Supreme Court justices before the deadline. Unfortunately, as we see here in this box, John Marshall is unable to deliver all the letters. All right. And so, first off, you're underlining Marshall there, or you're filling in Marshall there. But anyway, before his presidency was up, but some did not receive it in time, and therefore you have this question of, are they federal judges or not? Did they get it within the timeline, or is it now Thomas Jefferson who's president's responsibility to choose those replacements because he is now in office? So now we have a big question mark here. Okay, is it going to be Adams's judges getting in, or because they didn't get in before the deadline, is it going to be Thomas Jefferson's choice? So let's go ahead and click on to our next slide here. One of those individuals, as we see here, that does not receive the letter in time. So in theory, he is not a federal judge. It's going to be a guy named William Marbury. Now, William Marbury was extremely close with John Adams. John Adams had made essentially promises to Marbury that he was going to be a judge. This guy, I mean, you got to understand, this is probably the pinnacle of his career. He's probably served as a lawyer for decades. He now has an opportunity to be a federal judge, and he's angry that he's not getting it. All right, so this is really going to be where that court case comes from. In that last tiny little box in the right-hand corner, we're going to fill in Marbury, which is his last name. All right, so let's go on to the next slide here. Oops, sorry, they're a little bit out of order here. There we go. So click it like 4 times. Sorry about that, guys, because it came up out of order. But we'll see. In next blank you're going to fill in is up in that little star where it says Marbury sues, plain and simply because he wants his job. Yet again, this is something he's worked for his lifetime. He wants it. All right, so he actually sues the federal government. Basically says, "Look, man, this was my chance. You know, this was me, so I'm suing in order to try to get that opportunity." Now, Jefferson, guys, comes in and as new president and essentially refuses. He says, look, I'm not going to give in to the Federalists. I don't agree with the Federalists. I don't like the Federalist viewpoint on what they're doing in many cases. So I'm going to try to block this judge who may be able to impact laws for the next, decades or so. So he literally refuses to appoint him. So now it becomes a question of, is that legal? Can he do it? Did John Adams file the paperwork in time? Jefferson essentially tells his Secretary of State, James Madison, don't you dare deliver the commission to him. Don't give it to him. We are Democratic Republicans. Hold out. And so that is why ultimately ends up being Marbury versus Madison. You actually have Marbury suing James Madison for that commission into being a judge. So the court, now led by Chief Justice John Marshall, actually agrees with Jefferson. Irony of that is Marshall is the dude that didn't deliver the letter in the first place. So he is now the one making the decision and saying that those letters were not valid. Very strange, but that is how it played out. All right. Let's move on to in the star box up top, you're filling in Marbury sues. Over on the right, you're filling in refuses. Third box over, or second box down on the right, you're filling in James Madison. Bottom box on the right, you're filling in agreed. All right. So this brings us to the conclusion of the case. What happens as a result? The reality is that the Supreme Court rules that Jefferson can, in fact, block him from being a judge. So Marbury does not get his job, doesn't get his commission. But there is a larger message here. Essentially, the Supreme Court dictated whether or not something was constitutional, something that was not directly written in the Constitution. So they are now interpreting the Constitution in their own mindset. They are making decisions on what they think should happen, not necessarily what was written. This becomes a process known as judicial review. Our Supreme Court reviews any decision by the federal or state governments, and they have the ability to overturn things that they feel are unconstitutional. All right. Now, you're filling in on that box, judicial review, and then the second blank there is going to be constitutional. Okay. Actually, I'm sorry. First blank on that slide was can, so Jefferson can. Then over on the right, it was known as judicial review. Then on the bottom, it is constitutional. Now, there is a video clip on this slide, so if you click on the hyperlink of judicial review, it should bring up a short clip for you. I'll pause so you can pause me, all right, and enjoy the clip. All right, welcome back. So if you click your PowerPoint one more time, court reviewed, you should bring up one last slide, one last box there on that slide. The court reviewed an executive act, Jefferson's refusal to deliver Marbury's commission, and determined he did not violate the Constitution. So yet again, setting up the precedent that the Supreme Court has the ability to review decisions by the other branches. Essentially, it makes the Supreme Court an equal partner to the other branches. That's the reality of that decision, and that is a huge decision. All right, let's click on to our last slide here that we're going to cover today, and just some basics about Jefferson's presidency early on. Realize that he was a staunch Democratic Republican. He wanted to make sure that his policies were kind of overriding a lot of what the Federalists under John Adams had done. Part of that was the Marbury versus Madison and the Midnight Judges, but it goes beyond that. So if we click, as President Jefferson continued to fight back against the Federalist policies. Let's go ahead and click one more time. So, first box here, he wanted to reduce, that's what we're filling in. He wanted to reduce the size of the federal government, and he does. He drastically cuts the military. He drastically cuts spending on the Navy. He drastically cut spending on a lot of federal expenditures because he thought that the federal government was too powerful. He wanted the states to have more sway. Let's go ahead and click it one more time here. So with that, I just kind of mentioned it. He drastically cuts the size of the army and actually very heavily relies on state militias to front the military load. And that works for a while. We'll actually see that end up being a problem during Madison's presidency and the breakout of the War of 1812. That comes a little bit later, though. So anyway, in that box there, he says he cuts the size of the army. Army is the blank that you're filling in there. He also refuses to extend the National Bank Charter. Remember, Democratic Republicans were not a big fan of the National Bank pushed by Alexander Hamilton. They thought it was a violation of people's rights, thought it was an overextension of federal power. This fight between the bank and Democratic Republicans or states' rights individuals is going to come up over and over and over again. We're actually going to see this again with Andrew Jackson, where he'll actually fight against the bank too. It is a repetitive thing throughout United States history. In that box you're filling in extend the bank charter. Next box over says he cut taxes on property and whiskey. Yet again, they thought federal power is too strong, so they wanted to cut back on some of that power. Taxes is what's underlined at. Obviously, it's going to make him very popular with a lot of people. Americans don't like to pay taxes, so if you cut their taxes, it's a great way to get reelected. But anyway, filling taxes off of that one. Probably most importantly and most popularly, though, he repeals the Alien Sedition Act for obvious reasons: the violation of the First Amendment and the obstruction of the rights of most Americans. So that is off the books. Americans could go back to criticizing their government and complaining and writing whatever mean tweets you want or whatever you guys are doing online. All right? And then lastly, the only federal expenditure he supported was for public education. Expenditure, what you're filling in that blank there, essentially it means the only thing he's willing to spend money on at this point in his presidency is public education. He is a staunch supporter of education. He basically felt that that was a freedom that was entitled to any American, the reality of being able to get an education for not only for themselves but for their kids, so their kids can improve their place in their life, and he strongly believed in education. A great example, he starts the University of Virginia, UVA, which just won a national championship in basketball last year. He started that university all the way back in the 1700s because he believed so strongly in education. Well, that is going to be where we're going to wrap up for today. Like I said, we should have gotten through about 5 slides there today. And I'll probably get back to you with another YouTube clip of notes, I'm guessing sometime next week, all right? So keep tuned. If you have any questions or anything like that, throw a comment in Classroom or shoot me an email. Be well. I miss you guys. And Mr. C out. See you later. Bye.